Welcome to the Bergstrom Bunch podcast. I'm Kathy Bergstrom, and I have with me here today my son, Caleb. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join me today.
Thanks for having me, Mom. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, too. I know you're a busy guy with coaching and having comps coming up and just a variety of things, so I do really appreciate you being here. Before we dive into our conversation today, for those that are listening in that have never met you, they don't know you as a ninja coach, they might not even have seen you on American Ninja Warrior per se, give them a little bit of an idea of your backdrop, kind of your upbringing.
Well, I was raised by you as well as my dad, Jason, who's of course been on this podcast before. I was born in San Diego, California, where you and my dad, well, in California, you guys met, and then you guys had a bunch of kids, and I was one of them. And then we moved to Texas. We adopted a bunch of kids, and then now we're in Florida. We've been here for about 8 years. I've been here for a little less than that because I moved a little later. And I love being here in Florida. I've had a lot of opportunities come my way, including doing American Ninja Warrior, competing in it, and I'm a kids coach as well for it. I coach a traveling team, and I really love my job being able to invest in kids and help them learn how to do physical activities and skills, but also learn how to become better people and really help them grow in their values.
Yeah, Dad and I are really proud of all that you've done, especially given that you graduated high school and college at the same time and decided not to continue with college, but to just dive right into ninja. And you've really done an excellent job, especially with your Level Up program that we have going on, and just
sure. Yeah. I don't know if graduating and then leaving college was necessarily a decision made out of wisdom, or if it was just I was done with being in school. But
it ended up being a wise decision, right?
Competing definitely came onto the spectrum right after that for me, and I was doing that a lot.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back to talking about when we lived in Texas and got the adoptive kids, because that kind of lends to the topic for today. And as you well know, each of those kids came into our home with a variety of backdrops, a lot of different issues. And some of them shared rooms with you at various points in time. So you got a bird's eye view of kind of a lot of their struggles for each one of them. They came into our home having had a certain level of innocence stolen from them.
Sure.
And the one in particular that you shared a room with that you're referencing, him more than others even. And so the way he manifested that was really challenging. And you could tell that his purity had been stolen from him at a young age. And he just was engaging in a variety of things that you had never been exposed to, ever.
Yeah.
And he had seen things that you had never seen. So just for you, having lived with in that environment with this young man, how did it change your framework as far as what you thought even about, and I'm just going to dive into it, sex, sexuality, just because this young man had the struggles that he had. He crashed 2 of our computers due to looking at certain things, and so it was very heavily embedded in him, where he, as you well know, we had to hide everybody's cell phones when all the kids would come over, because if one was missing, we knew who took it and what they were looking at. And so he, just due to what he had been exposed to and his addictive nature, he couldn't help himself. So for you, how did you process that? Because I know you saw things, and you had to take that in and make some decisions for yourself as far as the journey you were making.
Right. Well, it was always in the back of my mind, the things that I saw him doing, a lot of time I wondered why he was doing it, because I was 10 years old at the time. None of those desires really come to play at that age. For some kids they do, and for him they clearly did, because he'd been exposed at such a young age.
Yeah.
But I was so confused as to why that was what he was spending his time doing, instead of being outside, and we had 11 acres of land we could explore, we could do so many different things, and so I wasn't sure why that was his release, that was his way of being entertained. until I was a little older. But then at that age, I was just constantly weirded out by it because anytime I wanted to partake in the same thing, I felt like, well, I'm just becoming who he is.
Yeah. Well, and of course, you know, he didn't grow up in an environment that was safe as far as protecting him from being exposed to certain things at a young age, where in our home, you were a little bit more sheltered. I mean, we didn't allow anything beyond a rated PG-13 movie in the home. And if it was rated PG-13 for things of a sexual nature, we didn't even allow that. So you were able to maintain an innocent mindset for much, much longer than kids who are exposed to that sort of thing when they're young. And I know for myself, I saw a lot of things when I was growing up. I grew up in a home where, I didn't have parents around very often, but the culture that I grew up in was not nearly as sex charged as the culture that we're in right now.
Sure.
So kids are being exposed even much younger than I was exposed to, porn and that sort of thing, and sometimes by accident. Yeah. Because their parents have it. And so anyway, but just, I guess just recognizing how that affects you as you develop as a young man and a young woman as well. So kind of, I guess, moving forward on that topic for you, what was it that led you to make a decision that that's not what you want? That rather than engaging in that, because in our culture it's normal for kids to embark on a certain journey. You have kids as young as 10 and 11 years old nowadays, even engaging in sex, and certainly it's, as you get older, it's just almost expected. But for you at some point in time, you made a decision that you were going to wait for certain things and not embark on that journey. What led you to that?
Whew! Okay, this is going to get exciting.
Okay,
we're about some crazy topics. Okay, so first off, I just want to say that I was not sheltered because you guys sheltered us. I was sheltered because of the values that you as parents had made sure we're in the home. But you also valued people, which means people were brought in who were not sheltered, and they were brought under that shelter, and they caused some havoc in that shelter.
Yeah, a little bit of havoc.
If that makes sense. But the headship was a shelter, if that makes sense. That God was the head of our home.
Yes.
But you guys did not actively shelter us. If you had, you would have avoided those people at all costs.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's one thing that was really great about being in that home, was that we did meet people. We were homeschooled because you guys wanted to teach us values, but then we also interacted with people so much. We had a youth group out of our house. We had people over for leadership development. We had 19 people living in that house at one point in time. I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah.
Because you were the one cooking at that point in time.
Yes,
I definitely wasn't.
Kylie joined in a little bit
and
too,
I
cooking,
did learn how to cook at that point as well, which I loved doing. And so the decision for me personally didn't come for a long time because I was under a good headship. And so it was against the rules,
Gotcha.
And for me, being my personality type, something being against the rules isn't enough to make it forbidden. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In any sense.
You are your mother's son.
So in that, I won't say like I partook in that, but it was very tempting for me.
Sure.
To look at girls and even to even go online, which I never really did. But if I saw something, I didn't always look away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was that temptation, even though I knew it was against the rules. That wasn't enough.
Well, it's challenging. It's very challenging. But I will say this, that for Dad and I, we knew that, there are stages of parenting. And when you're young, it's my perception that when the children are young, you want to try to preserve their innocence for as long as possible. But at some point in time, and especially when they hit puberty, that there are going to be inclinations there, and they are going to have to discover for themselves what decisions they're going to make for the future, especially in areas of, sex and all of that sort of thing.
I'm going to stop you there, though, because that term of, like, discover at that age, really it can be very weird for a lot of people, and they can interpret that a lot of different ways.
Well, sure. So I'll clarify. What I mean by discovery is more like discovering whether or not they're going to engage in a specific activity prior to marriage, or are they going to maintain the values that they've been raised in and those expectations. Right. So even though I don't think, I mean, certainly you would view it as forbidden, but I think it was more also you knew that was something Dad and I expected of you. And so to disappoint those who have instilled these values would kind of inhibit you from wanting to engage in it. But at some point in time, the temptation and the needs that you have as a person can outweigh how you feel about disappointing those who have instilled certain values in you.
Yeah, I would say when that temptation and need arrives, you begin to forget the expectations people have of you, or if you remember them, they do not outweigh the feeling that you have, even the emotional tug that you have to go look at those things or to experience those things. And so I guess to go back to that question of what was that point for me, I would say there wasn't a specific moment where it was like, oh, I realize how bad this is. I always knew it wasn't good, whenever I struggled with it. It was simply that it became no longer an expectation that I wouldn't do it, more it became an identity that I wouldn't do it.
Gotcha.
It became that I am not the type of person who would waste my time with that, and who would waste my purity with that, and who would waste even the gifts I have on stuff like that. Because we all know it is false. It does not help your brain. It gives you a high in the moment, but similar to drugs,
an emotional outlet.
Yeah. But similar to drugs, it really actually will put you on a downswing afterwards, especially sometimes depression, a lot of times depression actually, where then you have to go back to it in order to regain that emotional high.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like doing drugs, So let me pull on that string just a little bit and ask you then, so what did you do? Like, what fail-safes did you have? Did you put something in your life that if something popped up, or if you were exposed to this or to that you had a mechanism, or you had a go-to that would eliminate that desire for you? Or were you filling your mind with other things that really kind of inhibited you then from wanting to be entertained? What was that process for you?
Any failsafe I tried, like if you have an app or something that will keep you from doing that, which I actually never had those, because the problem wasn't deep enough to cover that. You know what I mean? Because like the issues that I was having was very much random events. I wasn't going online for it. It was more through Instagram. Honestly, Instagram's one of the easiest outlets nowadays, especially. And like most of the apps at that point weren't covering that because it was back in 2014, 2015 when most of this stuff, even Instagram was kind of new back then. It wasn't new, but things that you'd run into and pictures even you'd run into, those weren't really on the radar for most of these other apps that you could get online or whatever. And most of the time, like if I gave myself limitations on like my phone or something, it'd be super easy in the moment to just turn those limitations off.
Sure.
And so
it was a choice you made.
Yeah, I found out pretty quickly that those things like forced handcuffs didn't work. Even deleting apps didn't always work, because you can reinstall them when you feel like it in seconds, especially now.
Well, I think, though, that you had a little bit maybe more resistance in your temperament and personality and drive to restrict yourself in those areas. But for some people, they do have to completely have those fail safes in place, because it's way too tempting. And I mean, you were an anomaly for sure as far as young men your age, because I remember even having you and Caitlin start taking classes online, and it was a Florida online school, so that when we transferred from Texas to Florida, if you guys wanted to go to public school, you would have that ability. And so you went to the school, you got involved in the wrestling. And so I just remember saying, okay, so do you want to go to public school? And you saying to me, no, Mom, all these guys want to do is talk about girls and partying. And like, you had no commonality, because you were just driven in a different direction, even though you were an athlete too. And so just to say that I think that even at a younger age than high school, at some point in time, you came to a place where you decided that was not something that you wanted to engage in for the future for a specific reason.
Yeah, that wasn't my scene, especially talking about obscene things just wasn't in for me, and if it came down to it and you need to like throw away your phone in order to really get a reset, I think that'd be so healthy. I think overall, if you're young enough that you don't have to be, or if you're disengaged enough that you don't have to be scheduling things with your phone, it's going to be a richer lifestyle without it, because right now especially our electronics suck away so much of our free thinking and our time.
Oh, sure.
Like time that we should spend just sitting and thinking about different ideas we have and stuff, we spend on our phones instead. And we are designed to create ideas and learn new things, not necessarily on the topic of sex right now. but just as human beings, you know,
Yeah.
and we use electronics a lot or distractions a lot, and usually boys use that distraction a
Oh,
lot
absolutely.
to avoid thinking about, you know, things we need to get done and, you know, how our life is right now, because a lot of time as a young kid, a young teenager, you don't really like life.
Yeah.
You know, you feel the need to unplug a lot. And so our way of unplugging comes through a sexual nature a lot of the time as young boys, because we really, really, really want that. And we fantasize about that. We think about that. Just to be candid, you know, this is a lot of young boys are really thinking about this.
Well, and don't you think that the things that you're taking in with your eyes and even your ears lend so much to that? Because once those images are in there, you can't remove them.
Right.
So whether you're playing video games and the gals that are on the video games are hardly wearing anything,
Sure.
you know, or the music that you're listening to, you know, is singing about certain things that lend a lot to, you know, dating and even maybe promiscuity, and don't lend to the values that you're trying to adhere to, that it just is so much more difficult then to erase those things out of your mind. And even now, you mentioned social media. I mean, even for me, I only follow so many accounts, but even for me, stuff will come up on my Instagram feed that, oh, because you liked this or you listened to that, you might enjoy this. And sometimes it's imagery that I just, I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm 51 years old. How is this ending up on my Instagram? You know, like I look at this stuff, but we're just bombarded all over the place.
Yeah.
So really, because of that, it is so very difficult to take that stand and to be secure and solid in it. But as I mentioned to you earlier when talking, it kind of reminds me of even just your regimen when it comes to ninja, that you know, especially when you're competing, you know exactly the outcome you want. So you limit yourself and your sugar, your processed food, your training all the time, and you have a little bit more regiment and schedule. I think that's if you make the decision that I'm going to wait until marriage before having sex or engaging in certain things that are of a sexual nature, that it is really like being in that training. And it's like, I've got to eliminate the sugar because I have a different outcome that I'm waiting for. And I need to eliminate certain things that are going to inhibit me from that outcome. So fast forwarding.
Hold on. We got to talk about this a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Because with training, you'll get a lot of people who they'll do that, but only every once in a while. You know, when it's go time, it's time for me to diet and train and stuff. And so one thing that I think is so important is you got to start changing your mindset to, oh, I can't do this, to I'm the type of person who wouldn't do this. Mm-hmm. You understand the difference is that one is it's a rule that you can't break. The other is that you're simply a person who has decided their value is higher than that.
Yeah.
And that really helps, is because instead of it being an attack on some obscure rule that you've created for yourself, it's actually a direct attack on your person. Yeah. It's a direct attack on who you are, and that's so much easier to keep a standard in, because you realize, oh, I'm doing something that really isn't me.
Yeah.
And understanding, like, okay, I have these drives and these desires, but this isn't my value. Yeah. And I'm letting this be my value. So understanding, like, because we know random rules that you try to place in your life don't work. That's why there's so many diet plans that people try, because the first one didn't work, so they try the next one. And the same thing happens in our personal upbringing, in our personal walk, is that we try to add different rules and regulations into our life, and every time they don't work, we push ourselves a little deeper into that and start to believe that we never could get out of, let's say, looking at porn, or let's say always going back to a different relationship.
Yeah.
And understanding that it's because you're constantly trying just a human fix for that. You're constantly trying just a rule for that. And so you're actually trying the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And of course the result's going to be the same.
Don't you think, though, too, then it's sort of when people bounce from one partner to the next that it's almost like you're settling for something less now versus waiting for something so much better later. And I'll just I'll kind of back that up with even some of my own story, because I was that girl. I was in the club scene. Most have heard a little bit of my story if they've listened to Dad and I on the podcast, where I actually had 8 boyfriends when I gave my life to Christ. And so I really was that, hey, sample every flavor, kind of person, and not realizing, though, at all that there was anything better. It was just, sex really is addictive, but it wasn't even just about the sex. It was about being wanted, being desired, being needed, having that partner. Yeah. And typically if you don't have a values base that leads you in any other direction, having that partner also means engaging in physical intimacy with that partner. So for me, when I finally got to a place where I gave all that up, I let Jesus change my life, and I met Dad. Dad had the same backdrop as you, where I was the first person he ever dated. So his mindset was very, very different. He didn't look at me as just an object of lust.
Right.
He didn't look at me and think to myself, how long am I going to use this person before something else better comes along? And of course, we don't go into a relationship thinking like that, but that's what we do. And of course, for me, having 8 boyfriends, I wasn't looking at any of them thinking, ooh, marriage material. It was just, this is fun for the moment. Sure. And that really, unfortunately, isn't that what you think, that because we are in such a heightened sexualized culture, that what we've done is we've actually reduced the value of sex to the point that it's just like another thing on your plate. Just another thing that you're tasting. Just another thing, that feels good in the moment. So, and this is why I want to kind of now fast forward to you and Ashley and your story, your journey, because you both come from very similar backgrounds.
Right.
So your journey with her is so different, even than my journey with Dad. So I do kind of want to dive into that a little bit, because you now have this backdrop of where you chose to limit yourself in certain areas so that you could wait for the best that was out there for you, which is Ashley. And so meeting Ashley, then when the two of you started dating and moving forward on that journey, how did your backdrop affect the now relationship that you were engaged in?
Well, let me just say I was a dum-dum when it came to Ashley. And when we first met, she will tell you, it was love at first sight for her.
Yeah.
For me, it was more like at first sight, because I was at the point in my life where I was like, I'm going to be single forever.
Yeah.
I'm going to be traveling a lot. I'm going to be all over the place.
You just weren't ready.
I wasn't ready
for the responsibility.
I was definitely not ready for the responsibility, but I was also convinced that I was going to live a very crazy and difficult life and then die at the age of 35. I told you that when I was a kid, that was my goal, and it still was at that point. I was
hoping that was not like going to be a self-fulfilled prophecy or something.
It was at that point.
I
was on that way. Thank goodness.
Well, you were always
Ashley.
Crazy. That's why we built the ninja rig in the backyard.
Yeah. So
thrill seeker.
Anyway, so when I met Ashley, I thought she was cute. But I also was clearly not ready to be in a relationship, and neither was she in a lot of ways, because Ashley was coming out of a big life transition from being a full-time gymnast, where she was at the gym all the time, and having basically every aspect of her life mapped out by a coach, to then coming and meeting me, she kind of wanted still that coaching from me.
Yes.
And we didn't really understand that that's not how a relationship works. And we didn't get into a relationship at that point. We talked a lot, and we even prayed a lot about being in a relationship, especially after Ashley gave her life to God.
Yeah.
But one thing that personally I ran into was like every time we were talking, I just felt like she was getting too close. She was like clinging to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this wasn't her fault or anything. It was clearly a part of my immaturity.
Sure.
But it was
no, for both of you though, it was a growth journey for both of you.
Sure.
Because she was a little too clingy and you were not ready to have that clinginess.
Yeah, I was very independent.
And so yes, you were very independent. So the moment that you gave her any attention and then she took it in and kind of ran with it, and you were like, whoa, hold on, slow that horse down just a little bit. But you still, the two of you just connected so well at some point and made a decision that this is what we're looking forward to the future.
Yeah, after a few years of being friends.
Yeah, so and that's amazing. It's really amazing. You don't typically hear necessarily of people that were friends for that great length of time and then, moved in that direction per se. Usually if you hear a story like that, it's, well, we met and, this and that happened, but then I dated this person and I dated this person and then we ended up together. So the fact that the two of you were in that similar position, I just think, is an awesome thing. But just going into that, you still, once you start dating someone, it's not as though you're immune to temptation, especially once you get into a relationship.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah. And then especially once you move in the direction of kissing and some of that, it just, it arouses certain things. So kind of kind of give an idea,
Yeah.
though, of, maybe for people that are moving in that direction. And sometimes it is I won't say sometimes, it can be very difficult to put the brakes on,
Sure.
And so, but for the two of you having not done certain things, did that make it easier, would you say? Do you think? Or, because I know for me, the backdrop I came from, and Dad will tell you, I was more apt to want to be the touchy-feely, and he'd have to tell me, the more we save for marriage, the better. Although I was the one who put the brakes on us kissing, ironically, for various reasons. But for you and Ashley, would you say, what would you say that you had to do in order to not cross boundaries? Did the two of you have conversations where you were like, okay, this is getting hot and heavy, or, did you have any, maybe I'm getting a little too personal.
I have more of those conversations with you, Mom, actually. Yeah, where it gets a little too heavy.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, so
there's never been a time that you've said stuff to me and I'm like,
no, but you said stuff to me that made me go, yeah. Okay. I think part of it was we went into a relationship not because we liked each other. We knew we liked each other for a long time, but that wasn't the guiding factor of our relationship. I don't think just because you're attracted to someone means that you have to go into a relationship with them or you're obligated to. And personally, I wasn't ready. It wasn't that I wasn't ready for Ashley necessarily. I just wasn't ready for a relationship in general.
Yeah.
And I understood that, and I agreed personally to that. And no one forced us to not date. Even whenever I talked to you, you wouldn't tell me yes or no. And I always would get mad at you because you wouldn't give me a direct answer. And you told me it's because I had to make the decision, which was hard for me at that time, to understand, this is, the advice I'm getting, it can only be advice. It can't be orders.
Yeah.
And so understanding that was part of what helped me become my own man. And I say become my own man, not like I grew chest hair or anything, but just I became my own man as in I had my own values. I learned that I need to have my own values at that point.
You adopted certain things.
Yeah, and so whenever Ashley and I got together, we had already waited so long even just to date each other that we understood that we wanted to wait until marriage, and we wanted to have those values. Mm-hmm. And so whenever we got together, it wasn't like, okay, now we can start being intimate. It was it was more like, okay, now here's where our training starts. Here's where we learn how to be in a relationship together. Because that dating phase is really, that's kind of the purpose of it, is you guys learn how to be, as a man, you learn how to be a gentleman to a girl. And as a girl, you learn how to be attracted to a man, but at the same time not have him become everything.
Yeah, how to be a good partner.
Yeah, how to be a good partner. And so those are two things that we had to learn, not necessarily super fast, but we were the first people in our family to date, which I felt like was a lot of pressure on me because everyone was watching.
Yeah.
And it was something that I didn't enjoy. I didn't enjoy having everyone being focused on our relationship, but it just came with the territory.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just the family; it was the ninja family.
Oh, sure, everyone knew whenever Ashley and I were dating. Yeah,
yeah.
And that was totally fine. I understand. But then going into our relationship, I'm a businessman. So I had a chat with Ashley, like, by our second date. I sat her down, and I said, all right, here's the plan. Here's what we're not going to do. Here's what we are going to do.
Okay.
And then here's how long. We were like, we're going to wait 6 months before we kiss each other.
Okay.
And that didn't work. And so we had these set plans. One thing we set was that we weren't going to be hanging out after midnight.
Okay.
And we didn't always hold that boundary. Sometimes we pushed it a little bit, but we always made sure around midnight we were out of there. Yeah,
that was the goal.
Because one, we want to set a good example, especially for my students and the kids that I'm around, as they start, thinking about that. And the other is we wanted to make sure that we did not put ourselves in an area of temptation, because I knew that the later it got, the more tempted we would be. That
absolutely
totally makes sense in my brain whenever we were thinking about it. So Ashley and I collectively made those decisions. It wasn't just me sitting her down and ordering her.
Yeah.
We sat down and we made the plan together.
Yeah.
So
that
definitely helped.
Yeah, that's good. Good stuff. Well, and I think, as you mentioned, I don't think you just need to be a business person to want to. I think anytime you want something to be successful, does require some planning, not rigid planning, but some do's and don'ts as far as, I mean, and that's life in general. You want to have those boundaries set for yourself that this is what I do, this is what I don't do, regardless as to who's watching. And so, of course, for us, knowing that God is watching and sees everything even pushes us more so to adhere to a certain value set. But I think in a general sense, if you look at any great athlete, any great business person, anybody who's accomplished anything out there, they do have a schedule and they do map out what that's going to look like. So it's not as though if you want something great, it's not as though you can just expect it to happen. You know, it's anytime you just let something go and you just let it go, it's wherever it's going to go downhill. So it's always, maintaining that. So, okay, so moving from there then with you and Ashley, and of course, getting closer to the I do moment once you got engaged and you knew you were going to be married. I would imagine, because I know, at least for my relationship, that it does get harder because you do start to, in your mind, think to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to be marrying this person anyway. So those boundaries that you already had in place really, really made it catalytic for you guys to wait.
Yeah, that was one thing, having boundaries in place. Another thing was we were very busy with the wedding. And actually I would say being busy made it easier to not do anything, but also made it harder because when we had time together, it had been such a long time since we had another set of time together.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, we got to really hang out. We got to really be as close to each other right now as possible because I'm not going to be able to go on a date with you again for another 2 weeks because we have so much wedding planning to do or something like that. And so that made it more difficult, was like, okay, we got to get all of our time together now. And sometimes, what does that mean, all of our time together? You know what I mean? Like, sometimes that made it more difficult, but that didn't necessarily change the values or standards we had, right? We always leaned back on those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you train a wide age range of athletes, and but you also have some very deep personal conversations with a lot of those athletes. So what would you just say as kind of we think about closing up here? What would you say for anyone, no matter where they've been? Because for me, I had a wild journey. And, I certainly I hadn't maintained my purity in any capacity when I met Dad, but I was able to start again. And so what would you say to both sides, though? The young people that you talk to that have waited, whether it's by accident or intentionally, and then those who have engaged in certain things, what would you say as far as how would you encourage them if they decided, what, I've been in a lot of bad relationships, or I've done certain things and I really do want to wait until that right partner comes? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, one thing I would say is you're never the sum of your last mistake.
Okay.
So anytime you make a mistake, that doesn't mean you have to make another mistake. One thing that I heard was, if you want to set a habit and you miss a day, make sure you don't miss 2 days.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing whenever you're trying to set boundaries of things.
Was that a Craig Rochelle?
It was a Craig Rochelle quote, yeah. We love Craig Rochelle in this house.
He's a good guy.
But one thing that we whenever we have certain habits that can become addictive, the only way to get out of them sometimes is to have a habit that is constant, that is the opposite of it. And so just something to remember is that, in your strive to maintain a composure with your eyes and not look at things and not look at porn and not lust after girls, understanding that you might mess up, and also understanding that if you do, you still have a chance to continue forward and slowly but surely become the type of person who has a standard and value to not do those things. Yeah. And then the next thing is that in that your ability to do that shouldn't be a shame to other people. It's like, oh, I can do this, but you can't. That makes me better than you. Yeah. Or I waited and you didn't. Or you had no opportunity to wait because things happened to you as a kid. That makes me better than you. That is not the goal at all. Because even if you look at Jesus' disciples, they came to people saying, hey, look at how bad we used to be, and Jesus redeemed us. It's the same thing for us. Like, look, I went through all this, and I am broken, and I had these problems, but Jesus redeemed my problems too, and he could redeem yours.
Well, I think the difference too, even just you bringing up your relationship with Christ, I think that the biggest thing that I see is that it's difficult in its own right to just be disciplined.
Right.
but it's doubly difficult to be disciplined when you have that level of temptation. So for me, especially with my backdrop, the only one that could empower me to resist temptation and to be disciplined beyond what the natural afforded for me was my relationship with Christ, and having that power in my life,
Right.
to be able to stay strong in those areas that I was otherwise weak. Because it's not like you change in a day either, especially habits and patterns that have been ingrained in you for decades, or however many years. So anyway, no, but that's good stuff. Well, thank you for everyone who joined us today, and thanks again, Caleb. I enjoyed having you on the Bergstrom Bunch, and tune in. I don't know, I don't remember what we're on, Apple something, and I was gonna say them all, never mind. I don't know what we're on.
Make sure you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, and SoundCloud. Go check out my new album,